Open up your Bibles to Judges chapter 4. And I don't have a ton of time. If you don't have a Bible, that's okay. I'll read it to you. This is another wild one. It's like every week in Judges, okay?
Judges is just a weird Al Yankovic version.
It is. You could say that. All right. I'm just going to start reading. Is that all right? Normally I do an intro. I'm just diving in. Let's do this. Judges 4:1. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read through these verses. I'm going to try and go quickly through them, and then I've got three main ideas for you, and then a little thing for us to do at the end. Capiche? Kaposh. Thank you. Judges 4:1. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. Remember Ehud? He had that whole deal, left-handed, assassin dude, whatever. Okay, verse 2. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in a place I don't know how to pronounce. Okay. You'll want to highlight, underline Sisera. That's a main character in this story, all right? We'll want to remember that one. There's a lot of names that are going to be thrown around here. Remember that one. Verse 3. Then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help, for he had 900 chariots of iron, and he oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. By the way, Judges is sort of this downward spiral. Sort of our judges get worse, and the Israelite situation gets worse and worse. Last week, Ehud, they were enslaved by the Moabites for 18 years. This week, the Canaanites for 20 years. Downward trajectory, okay? And notice Sisera has 900 chariots, which we also talked a couple weeks ago about how chariots in the ancient Near Eastern world were their version of tanks. So if you've got the Israelites with their pitchforks and their swords, the Canaanites have tanks. And they have 900 of them. That's a problem. We keep reading. Verse 4. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at the time. By the way, Deborah, I like this. Her Hebrew, that word Deborah in the Hebrew means bee. So I've been calling her Queen Bee in my head during this whole time. But her job is not as queen. She's a prophet. Now, if we know what a prophet is, a prophet functions as sort of the megaphone for God. A prophet receives the word of God in the Old Testament and speaks them to their people. And to be a prophet was a big deal. You better get the words of God perfectly right, or else there would be severe consequences. Big task. Yes, okay? So that is her job. She serves as God and serves Israel by speaking the words of God to God's people. Verse 5. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah. That's nice. She has a palm tree named after her. Between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the people of Israel came up for her for judgment. She sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam? Yes. From Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, Go, gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun, and I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand? ? Big question by Deb. All right, so here's what's happening. Deborah, the prophet, is also functioning as Israel's judge, and she knows this dude, Barak. And she says to Barak, hey man, did not God command you to gather an army and go to this mountain called Mount Tabor and fight against the Canaanites? Now, Mount Tabor rises steeply from the Sea of Galilee, 1,843 feet up. And so this mountain is a military strategy point. You got to have the mountain. You always need the high ground. And so Deb knows this. Barak knows this because God told him to do it. And Deb is just reminding him. She's like poking him. Hey, man, what's your deal? Didn't God tell you to do this? Let's keep reading. Verse 8, pardon me. Barak said to her, if you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. Barak sees the wisdom of Deb. A lot of So we see here that despite Yahweh's guarantee of victory in this battle, Barak is very hesitant to go into battle. And a lot of people, when they read about Barak, sometimes the sermon is like, Barak is dumb because he asked Deborah for help. But I think he's actually smart. Because Barak knows something. He knows that God's speaking to Deborah. And he knows that God's with Deborah. And he's like, I don't know, I feel weak. That's a big army with 900 tanks down there. Deb, you come with me. He's a wise man. Let's keep reading. Let's see. Verse 9. And she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. You want to highlight, underline, the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. So Deborah essentially tells Barak, hey, what's going to happen? I will go with you. I'm happy to go with you, but you need to know that if I go, this victory that God has promised you will not be known for you having vanquished the Canaanites, but instead will be known for a woman having done it. And so we think, oh, it's going to be Deb. And we'll come back to that later. All right. So, verse 10, and Barak called out to Zebulun and Naphtali and Kadesh, and 10,000 men went up at his heels, and Deborah went up with him. Verse 11, now Heber, the Kenite, had separated from the Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, and pitched his tent as far away as the oak of Zenanim, which is near Kadesh. Verse 11, if you've got a Bible and you take notes, put like a bracket or a parentheses around verse 11. Because when I first read this, I'm following what's going on with Deb and Barak, and then I come to verse 11, and it's just out of nowhere. It talks about someone entirely different named Heber, who's like moving. Okay? When I lived in Colorado 2 years ago, a big thing in Colorado, houses are really expensive, so a lot of people just live in their RVs. And so they buy these RVs, these giant old like 1970s Airstreams, and they get like these beat down pickup trucks, and they just live full time in them. During the summer, during the winter. No hookups. They're essentially homeless, but in an RV. And they love to park their RVs right in front of my house. And so I had a front row view to them. They were very smelly and sometimes scary, just to be honest. They're like vagabonds, right? They're just on the road, moving from place to place, wherever it's warmest, sometimes wherever the snow goes, to go out and get some skiing. They're like ski bums, too. All right? It's like a lifestyle that I just had no desire to do, but big deal in Colorado. All right, I view Heber, the Kenite, kind of as like your Colorado RVer. He's a nomad. He's got his tent. He's roaming. He's going wherever's advantageous for him. He's going to move his family. Why is he mentioned here? I don't know. Let's keep reading. It's the strangest thing. Heber in his RV. But we pick back up with Sisera in our main story. When Sisera was told that Barak, the son of Abinoam, this is also the passage with strange words and names and places, had gone up to Mount Tabor, verse 13, Sisera called out to his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the men who were with him, from Harosheth Hagoim to the river Kishon. Verse 14. And Deborah said to Barak, up, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand. Does not the Lord go before you? So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. And the Lord, verse 15, routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army before Barak by the edge of the sword. And Sisera got down from his chariot and fled away by foot. And Barak pursued the chariots, and the army of Harosheth Hagoim and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not a man was left. And so in summary, they go up to the mountain because Deborah came with them. And then Deborah sees the army and the 900 chariots. And Deborah's like, hey, this is your time, man. Deborah must have seen something, heard something from God that made her say, Barak, go. And so Barak presumably goes, and they just rout them. And at first time I read through this, I was like, man, I'd love to know the details of this story. Like how did the Israelites, with their pitchforks, run down the mountain and destroy all these chariots. Like, it would be nice, author of Judges, if you gave me this detail of how it happened. And then I kept reading to Judges 5. And Judges 5 is a duet between Deb and Barak. They're going to sing a song for their victory. And I want you to look at verse 20. I believe it's 20. Yes, Judges 5:20. Deb and Barak sing this. From heaven the stars fought. From their courses they fought against Sisera. The torrent, Kishon, swept them away, the ancient torrent, the torrent Kishon. March on, my soul, with might. And so if you read a few verses earlier in their song, we know, what does it mean that God fought for them with the stars? It's like God's not reaching up literally to Beetlejuice and like whacking them with it, right? Like, that's not happening. What does this mean? What this means is that God opened up the heavens, and a storm came, and a torrential rain came, and the river Kishon rose up, and suddenly the chariots, the tanks, down in the plains. What happens when chariots, and there's a giant storm of water? Well, they get stuck, becomes mud. They can't go anywhere. They're rendered useless. And so suddenly the Israelites from on high come down Mount Tabor, and they get victory. And your passage, Judges, the author makes sure to tell you Yahweh, the personal name of God, was the one who routed them. Apart from God, and this, by the way, is what Deb saw. She's standing up on that mountain. Barak's too dumb to know what's happening. And Deb goes, hey, man, there's a storm coming. Now's the time to go. And they do. And Yahweh gets the victory. I love that story. So cool. Also a good lesson to keep reading your Bibles and not slow down. All right. Where are we? Verse 17. But Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin, the king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. Who's Heber the Kenite? Verse 11, our dude in the RV. You're like, why is that verse 11 there? Why is that out of nowhere? He reappears. They trucked on up over to, they fled away. And so they're nomads in their RV. They run away. We're told about this in verse 11. And Sisera flees from battle from his downed tanks right into the tent of the wife of Heber the Kenite. And then this is where Judges gets weird. By the way, Sisera knows this family. Sisera, the Canaanites, and the Kenites are old allies. And so this family in the RV would know of Sisera, and there should be allies. They should be buddies. All right? Verse 18. And Jael, this is the wife, came out to meet Sisera and said to him, turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me. Do not be afraid. So he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him up with a rug. ESV, the version I read, says turn aside. And I was like, what does that mean? The CSB is a more helpful translation. Turn aside means to come in. So Jael says to Sisera, hey, come into the tent. Come on in. Just no problem. Come on into my tent. Okay, here we go. Verse 19. And he said to her, please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. So she opened up a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. And so you've got this wife, Jael, who brings him in. Sisera's like, can I have some water? She's like, here's some milk. By the way, if you're really tired, imagine you're a commander of an army. You just got crushed by this horde of Israelites coming down a mountain. Your tanks were swept away. You run away in the desert, and you find an ally. You're exhausted, and you walk into the tent. And you're like, gosh, can I get some water? And you're given some milk. What's going to happen to you? You're going to fall asleep. It's like something's happening here. Okay. Let's get weird. It's Judges. Okay. Verse 20, and he said to her, stand at the opening of the tent, and if any man comes and asks of you, is anyone here? Say no. Sisera's hiding. He's like, Jael, just tell him, if anyone like Barak comes to my tent, tell him I'm not here. Okay. Verse 21, but Jael, the wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand. Then she went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went into the ground while he was lying fast asleep from weariness. And so he died. Savage move by Jael. It's like, okay.
They crammed all that into one verse.
Yeah, it's like we have all this build-up, this long story. Verse 20 hits you with the tent peg. All right, why the tent peg? The first time I read like tent peg, it's like, what an odd passage.
They're short. They are very short.
They're very short. So yeah, this is my profound theological observation for you. She lives in an RV. Like, it's like probably all she's got, and it's sharp. All right, and she's got to put this guy to death. Now, well, let's keep reading, and then I'll end it. All right, let's keep going. Verse 21. Oh, no, that's the tent peg. We keep going. Verse 22. And behold, as Barak was pursuing Sisera, Jael went out to meet him and said to him, "Come, and I will show you the man whom you are seeking." So he went into her tent, and there lay Sisera dead with the tent peg in his temple. So on that day, God subdued Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the people of Israel. What's the sermon here? What's the sermon here? One thing, I'm actually, for my 3 points for you, I'm going to focus on Deborah and Barak, but I don't want to just leave Jael and the tent peg alone. Little things that are happening here with Jael and the tent peg and the murder here. She is compared to, and there are comparisons to be made with Ehud, tricking someone, deceiving someone, stabbing someone. The complexity of, did she do a good thing or was it actually bad? And most scholars point out that, again, God's silent when it comes to Jael. And they note in that culture what she did, the wife of the household, the husband's not mentioned, and she murders an ally. That's a problem, and it would have been a big no-no. Okay? So she kind of does something that would be frowned upon. God might not have been in it, and yet it sort of accomplishes God's will. It's a very complex landing. It's meant to make you ponder and think, that's strange. I don't know. And that's where we'll land. That's strange. I don't know. But it's Jael with the tent peg, and she's a savage. All right? But here's my thoughts for you. I've got 3 thoughts for you, 3 takeaways from the story that I'll really focus on with Deborah and Barak. All right? The first one is this. Don't, or do not, lose sight of what God has commanded you to do. And in your notes, you can write Judges 4:6. Judges 4:6. I'll read that again for you. I'll say it again too. Do not lose sight of what God has already commanded you to do. She sent, this is talking about Deborah in Judges 4:6, and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, I struggle with that, from Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, "Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go?" And so that's the question I want to ask you tonight. Has not the Lord, your God, commanded you? Fill in the blank. Anyone want to take a guess at how many commandments there are in the Old Testament?
746.
Okay.
10.
10. Profound. Yes?
654.
Oh, he's got you beat. Is that true? Is it really?
It's 693, I thought.
I don't know. My commentary said 613. All right, your homework, read through the Old Testament, tally up how many commandments there are. Okay? And then you come back to me. Point being, there's a whole lot of commandments. And here's the reality, too. I bet if you read your commandments, and even the 10 commandments, which are a summation of the law, if you could distill the 600 to 700 commandments into 10, it's these 10. And then Jesus even condenses those more. Love your neighbor as yourself. Right? Love the Lord your God. These are the 2 greatest commandments. What has God commanded you to do already? And don't forget it. And I actually want to give you 3 to focus on, 3 that I think we often forget about. It's like, do not lust. Sure. Don't do that. Like, forgive others. That's a command. Do that. But here's another one. Do not love the world. Write that down. Oh, but Ryan, I'm called to love people. Yes, you are. Love them as yourself. But do not love the world. 1 John 2:15. John says this, do not love the world or the things of this world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. My friends, put another way, do not be infatuated with the things of this world. Do not be infatuated with the things that this world is infatuated with. Do not covet the things that the world covets more than God. Do not covet material things more than God. Do not covet the approval of other people more than God. Do not love the world. If you want the secret to happiness and to being content, it's finding that in God and God alone, and not the things that your friends think will ultimately bring you satisfaction. Love God, pursue Him, and there you will find joy. That's a commandment. Number 2, do not love the praise of man more than God. John 12:43 says this, for they love the glory that comes from man more than the glory that comes from God. My friends in this room, you might be like Barak, where God has told you, commanded you something, and you are struggling to follow it. Because the people you've surrounded yourself with have no interest in doing that. And so because you've surrounded yourself with them, and you are primarily concerned with appeasing them, you're going to compromise. God says go right, everyone else is going left, you're going to veer left. Unless you have the courage and the conviction to say yes to God. Jeremiah 6:16 says, stand by the road and look and ask for the ancient path where the good way is and walk in it. God has laid a path for you of obedience. Say yes. Say yes. Okay? 3, do not fear. And that's a command. I read this. I don't know if this is true. I'm getting ready for a baby. There's balloons, whatever. I don't know if this is actually true, but I found it fascinating that, did you know, apparently, babies are born, you were born with a fear of only 2 things. A fear of falling and a fear of loud noises. Everything else you fear has been picked up along the way. Okay? And so everything that you fear is the result of probably sin and brokenness that you've picked up as you have lived this life. God says, do not fear. Isaiah 41:10, fear not, for I am with you. Be not displayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Okay? Do not fear. Friends, however, wherever you are fearful, I'm going to touch on this. God has gone before you. You have nothing to fear because you ultimately have Him. That's a commandment, all right? Bullet point number 2, we're cruising. Second thing that you can take away from this talk. Be a friend like Deborah, and find a friend like Deborah to help you follow God. Yep. Be a friend like Deborah, and find a friend like Deborah to help you follow God. Barak, God spoke to him apparently and was like, hey, go up to that mountain and fight them. And he's terrified. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know what the right thing is. And Deb comes on the scene and says, has God not told you to do this? So Deborah reminds Barak of what he needs to do. We could all use a reminding from other people of what God is commanding us to do. But not only that, Barak's terrified. And he's like, I'll go if you go. And Deborah says, I'm paraphrasing, I'd love to go. I'm there. She goes with him to help him accomplish the hard thing in front of him. My friends, you need friends like this, and you need to be a friend like this. I talked a couple of weeks, I think back in December, about friendship, and I said, be the type of friend that you want to have, and the rest will follow. You guys are seeking excellent friends that you want to spend time around, that will encourage you. If you're seeking that, be that to someone else. That's the first step. Okay? Last point, let's land it here. Do not forget that God has gone before you. Do not forget that God has gone before you. How do you get the courage to not fear? How do you get the courage to say yes to Jesus in all the ways that He is obeying you? I think we have this picture of God, that either God is sort of looking over your shoulder, checking your homework, like, hey man, messed up here, got that wrong, better correct that. Or we have a picture that is somewhat right, that God is walking alongside you, hand in hand. That is true. But do not forget that God has already gone before you. Highlight right next to that, Judges 4:14. And this is where Deborah says to Barak, does not the Lord go out before you? And so, my friends, God has gone before us. He is leading you, but he's gone before you. Jesus says, live this life, conquer death. He is the true conqueror who's made you more than a conqueror. Okay? So follow after him. All right, so what? Here's where I want to land, and this is the so what underneath on the 3 lines. I want us to take 2 minutes and ask you this question. What is God commanding you to do? And what is your next step of obedience? Point number 1 is to not lose sight of what God has commanded you to do. I want us to spend a few minutes, 2 minutes, maybe a minute, in silence, and I want you to write down things that come to mind. And if you would feel so bold, share them in small group. Thumbs up to me? Okay. In a moment, I'm going to say go, and when I say go, it's going to be quiet. It might feel awkward. That's fine. We're just going to embrace it. You're going to write stuff down. You're going to pray to God. 3, 2, 1, go. God, you commanded us to love you with all of our heart, and with all of our soul, and all of our mind. We pray that we would do just that. Would you give us the courage to love you supremely? We love you. In your name we pray. Amen. My friends, you are dismissed. Small